restoration panel and session here at the Decolonizing Economics Summit. I am honored to be joined by, our panelists. So first is Ali Metters Knight. We're also from California Open Lands and TEK Chico. I've been honored to work with Ali for the last 4 years, as well as Charlie Reed from Save California Salmon and Mary Burt from Cal Trout. So we're going to basically just take this in a deep conversational direction, do a deep dive on restoration efforts being done and how to decolonize the stewarding of the earth. And especially for California, this is a really important topic. I'm going to introduce, the way we're going to do this agenda is first, each of our organizations are going to do about a 10-minute introduction to their work, their goals and objectives, and what they're doing. And then we'll have a fishbowl discussion and conversation among our panelists for the next 30 minutes. And then the last half-hour portion is going to be audience Q&A, as well as more conversation between our panelists. If you have questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. Our moderators will take your questions and then we'll address them in that last half-hour section. So again, welcome all. Okay, so we're going to start with Save California Salmon, a really wonderful organization that we've also been honored to know and work with for several years. So Charlie Reed is the education director at Save California Salmon. They're a Hoopa, Yurok, and Karuk person from the Klamath Trinity watershed. So welcome, Charlie. Take it away.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you all for inviting me to such a great project. And, I'm always honored to be featured in these type of panels with some great minds. But yeah, my name is Charlie Reed, Hoopa, Yurok, Karuk person. I'm also a father of an almost 3-year-old daughter and a husband for a little over a year now. So I feel like those are two of my most favorite titles that I never thought I'd be able to have. So I love having time to be able to include that into my introduction because very much part of who I am and what brings me into these spaces. So I also like to put the disclaimer out that I'm an enrolled Hoopa Valley tribal member. However, a lot of my cultural values and perspectives come from the Karuk people's belief system. Just very much raised in a Karuk household. Spent most of my life either going to dam removal rallies or and going to some of our ceremonies throughout my whole childhood. So that's where all these perspectives and values have come from for me, as well as the education that I received from Cal Poly Humboldt, high school and college. All that stuff all contributes to what I bring to the table today. But like Mel had said, I'm the education director at Save California Salmon. I've only been here for about, I think, since like September. And some of the projects that we've been working on has been Traditional Ecological Knowledge curriculum that's been state standardized, which is a project that wouldn't have been able to happen if it weren't for that community buy-in, that community effort, because there's so many different parts of it that we could have just never done on our own, whether that's developing the curriculum in of itself, but also having the information, being trusted to handle that information in a good way with the shared goal and vision of kind of decolonizing our education system and having it be more representative of who we are as Indigenous people. And we launched that, I think, in like November. I just was able to visit a school this week, and we're doing some rivers and fish module lesson plan implementation. And 2 kids, they seen their dad highlighted. They're able to answer so many questions just because they have that going on in their home. So to really be able to have that firsthand experience, to see it working in the way that we had envisioned, really gives me that reminder that all this work and all this organizing and all this talking is worth it. And so those are some of the things that we do. We also do a lot of positive experiences where we just engage with river communities, Native youth, and positive experiences, getting them into the mountains or into the river, rafting, and enhancing their overall relationship to the land. So I think that we're having that multi-pronged approach to making sure that our kids know that they're very much the future, and we're trying to, increase their capacities to handle these type of ongoing issues. And so being able to fill up their cup now will hopefully give them the tools and skills later in their life to really be able to make a difference. And so again, thank you all for having me. I look forward to learning and listening from the other amazing panelists. So I will hand it over to Mary.
Thank you, Charlie. So next we have Mary Burke, who is the North Coast Regional Manager at California Trout, or Cal Trout, a statewide nonprofit organization. She lives and works to the north of Wigi, also known as Humboldt Bay. So take it away, Mary.
Thank you. Thanks, Charlie, for modeling such a great, whole self introduction. And I'm really honored to be here. Thank you for inviting me into this space. So my ancestors are Euro-American settlers. My auntie first came to the North Coast back in the late 60s and settled down on the end of the Ottawa River, also known as the Mad River, and worked in Arcata. And as I was writing this and thinking about that introduction, I'm like, that's the same for me. So I imprinted on that landscape on the lower end of the Ottawa and live there and work in Arcata. And it feels amazing that my son is also deeply connected to this landscape. And yes, I'm a mother and a daughter, and my mother and father also live in the area, and cousins as well. So I work with California Trout, and we are a statewide nonprofit. We are working to ensure that there's healthy water for resilient populations of wild fish for a better California. And we have regional offices. So up here in the North Coast, in the Shasta region, Southern California, Eastern Sierra, Bay Area, and Central Valley. And we also have our headquarters are in San Francisco. And the organization is 50 years old and has a history that's really connected into advocacy and lobbying for protecting California waterways. That's based in watershed and fisheries science with a strong connection to fly fishing. So this definition as like a sports person's conservation organization helped us through the years develop relationships with a donor base and also with both sides of the aisle in Sacramento. And 50 years is a pretty decently lifelong lifespan for a conservation organization, so the model has been fairly successful. But what I'm, going to talk more about is the shift that the organization has been through. And about 12 years ago, the organization went from the lobbying more to walking the talk. So we started doing projects using proof of concept, based in science and getting projects on the ground. And we've done some really powerful, successful efforts. Eastern Sierra doing a methodology around meadows restoration so that we can really target our activities towards building healthy meadows. In Southern California, making massive bridges to promote Southern California steelhead and anadromine. In the Central Valley, demonstrating that managed rice fields can grow big, fat, juvenile fish so that they have a better chance of survival to the ocean. In the Shasta, working closely with Charlie's efforts with Save California Salmon, other tribes and organizations on klamath dam removal. And on the North Coast, we've been developing projects and from the headwaters of the Eel to the Smith River, but our partners at the Smith River Alliance are working strongly up there. So up to the north into Redwood Creek. From my perspective, the fundamental shift that is happening is that we are working more closely, more intentionally, more in relationship in our communities. And just to tell a little story, I've had the chance to meet and work a little bit with Brooke Thompson, who's working with the Yurok Tribe Fisheries. Over the last summer, we've been implementing a big project up on Redwood Creek, or Prairie Creek, sub-watershed to Redwood Creek. And we were just chatting as we were walking from one side of the project site to the other, and I was telling her about this, you know, deepening the understanding of working in a relationship, in a relational manner with partners, with the landscape, and how this was emerging for me. And she looked at me and she said, well, it's only come to my attention, you know, that the Euro-American sort of centric viewpoint doesn't work from that perspective. And so we both got a good sort of laugh out of learning about each other's perspective. So across the organization, we have a few practices that are furthering our evolution. We have a diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice space that's constantly evolving. And we've developed a rubric, and I'd be happy to share more about that, but it's just a methodology to help bring attention to who we work with and who we benefit in our project. Thank you.
Okay, thanks so much, Mary. Last but definitely not least, I have the I'm going to introduce this amazing matriarch sitting right next to me, Allie Metters Knight. Allie Metters Knight is a Mechoopda tribal member, mother of 5, and traditional basket weaver based in Chico, California. She's been recognized by the Mechoopda tribe as a master TEK practitioner and has been a traditional ecological knowledge practitioner for over 20 years, collaborating on environmental education and land restoration projects with a huge list of organizations and agencies. She's also the executive director of California Open Lands Conservation Land Trust. And yeah, take it away. Oh.
Hey, good evening. So yes, my name is Allie Metters Knight. A little bit more background of what I do. I also paint. I'm an artist, and my inspiration are restoration projects to look at the land, look at the aspects, and perhaps come up with a different imagination or dream up what should be there that's not there. And once I understand the identification of this is a woodland, this is what it should be, I dream up what it should be back. And so a lot of these paintings I do now are murals, and we'll get into murals. So, you know, that's kind of how I started this all out, was just doing outdoor education with children part-time, weaving baskets, tending material, doing art, and being a mom, and trying to create a life for myself around those things. And as a Native woman in my Indigenous community, teaching about practices, teaching about plants, I began over years and years to accumulate more and more knowledge and have more place-based science and experience on places. 17 years here, 14 years here, 12 years here. And also learning how to put burning material in those places, and when something happened, when something didn't happen, when I saw a certain species there, when they were gone, when they came back. All those things are in the historical record of a human who has traditional ecological knowledge. And so I really started to realize that the most important part we really had with our tribe was to try to get into stewardship contracting, at least co-stewardship contracts. Those were available through the federal government.
Turning up the volume so more folks can hear you.
Sorry. So this is mostly available for the federal government under the USDA. And usually tribes are kind of used to Secretary of Interior, all the laws that are under US trust laws. And so this was kind of a change because we're going to the USDA and dealing with forestry and co-stewarding. And in California, where my Indigenous territory is Campfire. So I realized a lot of like great information about, you know, 33 million acres of California forestry. 19 of that is federal, and everywhere in California is tribal territory. So to me, that's workforce development. And I was able to testify to subcommittee in Congress and really get some backing just by doing straight, you know, basically Native lobbying and showing up and saying, look, I'm a practitioner. And we do need to tend to the forest, and we don't need to just procure the forest and make up, you know, timber sticks that are not indigenous to the area and then just harvest them like agriculture. We can procure our own forest, and we can harvest carbon. We can do the carbon sequestration that you need, and we can do the climate change. So all those words that were just kind of, you know, floating around there and about 2019. So I working with my tribe to develop workforce development. And really what it ended with is a certification process to create the certification for place-based science and allow folks to come in and learn keystone species, oaks, willows, riparian restoration, woodland restoration, meadow restoration, but it's place-based. So you get to have your time and certification in that place. So I couldn't say, yeah, you got a TEK certification, so you can work anywhere in Indian country. No, your cert is actually to a location, to an actual preserve, or to a conservation land, or to a creek, or some public land where you have spent time, and now that time is accumulated under your cert. And that really gives people a bird's eye of like, oh, I can look at that place and see what's done, what you may know about, and then you can actually have the ability to learn the new science of a new place based on a new methodology of science, which is traditional ecological knowledge. So as a executive director of California Open Lands, it's kind of a new thing to have a native, you know, practitioner, the executive director of Forever Land in California. Forever Land is, it's conservation land, it's preserved, it's conserved forever. You don't even get that promise when you have land in trust from the federal government. Just watch what's happening at Standing Rock. You know, when it's in trust, it's like that googly eye snake in that one movie, you know, Jungle Book. Trust me, that's land and trust. And so it's better sometimes to have it in a better position so you can actually conserve and preserve it. So this allows us to pay attention to the ecosystem and not so much as humans being the human centric type approach to land and saying we're here for birds, we're here for pollinators, we're here for all those things. So this is a methodology of understanding stewarding. So my goals today, my objectives, you know, are to certify a workforce that are able to go from cultural burning to cultivating, seed gathering, living seed banks, restoration, and be able to exchange information, trade within an economy of the ecosystem from tribe to tribe. And so that is my goal. It was the goal that started and before the 1850s. We all had our own economy. We had our trade routes. And my goal is to recreate that through traditional ecological knowledge, through workforce development, seed restoration, and of course, the propagation of the things that we have to create our economy back and have, you know, a true revolution by switching up the actual currency.
Thank you so much, Allie. I also will put the websites of our respective organizations in the chat so you can learn more about what our respective organizations do. So, you know, so now we're gonna sort of throw out a few discussion questions just as prompts to get the conversation going between our panelists. And, you know, some of what you know, Ali and Charlie have addressed kind of touches upon this, but we're going to go and dive a little deeper. Now, everybody has heard the term land back, right? And land back can mean, you know, different things to different people. People have, you know, kind of different imaginings of it, but we're going to like drill it down and really ask, what does land back mean to all of you on the panel in your work? So Ali, you want to start that off and then we'll go around again and maybe cross talk?
Okay,
Sure.
I'm going to be really quick, but not, you know, land back, from what I've understand and how I understand is a derivative of colonization. So to colonize a place is to take away the political power from the indigenous people from that place and replace it into a new power. So that's power over your water, power over your food, power over everything, where you fish, where you eat, where you live, how you're educated, the language you speak. That is to be colonized. When you are forced to do that, that is even like forced colonization, you know, and we have that here in California. But to undo that is to actually displace and actually replace the political power over your food, over your water, over your sovereignty, over your agency of how you speak back to the people, back to the indigenous people. And so in my understanding of climate change and my understanding of the community we live in, once we can start to steward our land as indigenous led movements to steward land, then you have political power over the land, you have political power over the water there, you have political power over all the agencies that's there. Then that is a decolonization process. In my understanding of land back, that is what we're doing. We're changing the paradigm of who has political power over that land and placing it back into the land stewards, the indigenous people of that place.
Thank you. Charlie?
Yeah, I'm just so grateful for Allie's ability to facilitate such great verbiage around. I feel like is just like a kind of a buzzword these days, and I think that that's something that I was trying to like figure out, like how am I supposed to explain this concept that is very much like, you know, it's a foreign concept when we're talking about like we just want to be able to live our lives the way we know how. So what I was thinking, land back, it's like land back, water back, education back, culture back, all these things that had been taken from us in the first place, and we're just trying to get back to that. But that also kind of has this connotation that we're trying to move backwards when we're really trying to move forwards. So there's a little bit of you know, things to say about it, but I do support it like 100% just because it does, that is the way we are able to get back or get to a place where we're more ourselves in the way we know how to live and manage and take care of this land and ourselves. So how I feel about land back is it's really, we're trying to regain our identity. You know, if we're place-based people and that place is now out of our control or out of our management jurisdiction, then that's a big part of who we are that's just been missing for hundreds of years. So we're physically, emotionally, nutritionally, and spiritually connected to the land. So coming from the Cuttook tribe, we are fortunate to still live in our Aboriginal territory. However, we have still been forcibly and like institutionally removed from managing our Aboriginal territory. You know, 1 million acres have been in the hands of the Forest Service, who have just not managed the forest optimally, and so it makes our lives harder in the sense of like our sacred sites are no longer accessible. Animal trails are no longer accessible, so everyone is kind of having to deal with the onsets of their mismanagement. And if we're not able to conduct our ceremonies, then you know that's a form of erasure, that's a form of colonial violence, and that's with intention. That's not just like you know, something that wasn't really planned or prepared for. Like they intentionally did that to us. So when we're talking land back, we're also talking like our culture back. You know, we're trying to get to a place where, you know, it is safe for our medicine people to go on their journey and not have to worry about, you know, the physical side of it more than they already have to. So it conceptualizes so much more than just like getting, you know, acreages of land back. There's so much more than that. And it's not like that we're ungrateful for these efforts and these successes, but like there's so much more to it. And so I think that's what we're trying to accomplish today in this conversation, is just like recognizing the different layers and complexities that come with it. And so I think that while, you know, there has been recently like a sacred acts thing that had passed early for the Cuttook people for Cutamin and Mikiatum Sacred Land Act, that's only 1 million acres out, or that's only a thousand. What I'm saying is there's still 95% of our Aboriginal territory that is still being mismanaged and still in the hands of the Forest Service. So I guess if we're trying to imagine land back, we're really trying to regain a core sense of our identity.
Thank you so much. And Mary, your perspective.
Thank you, Charlie and Allie. I can speak from, you know, the organizational perspective. And I guess I'd say two things. One, as an organization that comes into these conversations around land where, for example, on the coast here, sea level rise is impacting, the productivity of agricultural lands. And the people who now own those lands are looking for ways to, divest themselves. It's no longer, meeting their values and interests. And so I think at the highest level of trying to facilitate actual acquisition into tribal hands is, land back sort of at a really high level. And then another strategy that I'm attempting to facilitate on the Badawat project, there's a estuary restoration project that we built a backwater pond connected to the river and are revegetating it with native plants. There's also public access features. So through the development of that project is taking steps to reach out to the Wiyot tribe, reach out to Blue Lake Rancheria, employ Yurok tribe revegetation crew. And so take every opportunity to weave the narrative, both maybe specifically on signage. We're doing that, we're working with a local native artist, and storytelling, and just integrating that to the experience of people coming to the public access, and then also making sure that when the agent, so this is owned by an agency, that agency and the tribe start to develop a relationship for access. And so the plants and the access and the storytelling experience are getting wound together.
Thank you. Any last thoughts on this question before I move on to the next? Anything you might have forgotten? Oh, okay, great. All right, so the next question is it's a little interesting. It's a little tricky. I'm going to give a little bit of background to this because, again, the name of this session is Decolonizing Restoration. But when we look at it from that TEK perspective, what does restoration really mean? And what has it meant and what should it mean? So California is a really, really interestingly unique place. So, I'm an ecologist. I was trained mostly in Latin America. And in Latin America, there's a lot of, literature that goes back to the 16th century or whatever. The Spanish would send out the priests to do botanical surveys. California is a little different because the gold rush came first. I don't know if people know this, but the very first botanical survey that was conducted in California was in 1895, right? So that's fully 45 years after the gold rush destroyed every creek, wiped out the wetlands, after 45 years of genocide of the native peoples who stewarded this land. So one of the challenges I know that we encounter in restoration is what are we restoring it to? Because, I know, as David Cobb likes to say, you don't know what you don't know, right? The scientific record for California only goes back 100 years. So there's a lot about what restoration means that has different meanings in California. And so when we're in this, we live in a colonized capitalist society. We live in a colonized capitalist society that has a colonized and capitalist mode of environmental restoration work and conservation. Conservation has been shaped by all of this. And so, but that is starting to change, right? Decolonization might seem very incompatible with the way these things have run for a very long time, but it is changing because we have real ecological challenges that are threatening us all. I don't need to talk about wildfires, but let's talk about climate change. We just had these devastating floods, right? We have also salmon and other, keystone species on the verge of extinction. So the climate is changing within the conservation world, but there are still a lot of challenges because even the view of what good restoration habitats should look like is very different from an Indigenous and TEK perspective versus somebody who's using, science on a data set that's only 100 years old. So I kind of want to go a little bit, Mary, since Cal Trout has been doing this for a long time, I'd like you to speak to a little bit of the contrast and the changes that you see happening, and then we'll go to Charlie and then, or Ali and Charlie to talk about how they now have been navigating pursuing decolonization and objectives in this environment. So go ahead, Mary.
Okay, thank you. So I guess just to go right into one particular element that we've run into is, the very capitalist and colonized framework of like how money flows down from legislature into agencies and then into grant agreements and contracts. Those contracts, to be able to work directly as a nonprofit to a tribe, are often a limiting factor because of waiving sovereign immunity. And so, for example, again, on the Prairie Creek project with the Yurok tribe, is when it came time to attempt to use the incredible capacity and skills of the Yurok tribe fisheries and the construction corporation, we found, that we actually had a policy of contracting that was stopping us. So thankfully, we have a state agency that was able to grant, to grant funding directly to the tribe. But there's an example of like a policy that can be worked on and is being worked on to try to facilitate that land back and stewardship and action from the tribe that then we can help mobilize. One of the other, I guess, considerations that people are talking about, and I can't say I'm an expert on this, but the idea of novel landscapes in the way that climate change is affecting the work that we do, right? We aren't necessarily attempting to get back to the way it was. We have to look at the conditions that are on the landscape now and be planning for what we think is going to happen in the future. So biodiversity is like, rather than looking at everything through the eyes of a fish and how's it going to affect a fish, we're having a more broad lens and incorporating more biodiversity into our work.
Ali or Charlie, do you want to? Go ahead, Charlie.
Yeah. Can you reiterate the question for me, please? I kind of lost it.
Yeah, sure. Just sort of in the policy environment that we have now for restoration, like, how do you navigate what you're trying to do in an environment that was kind of not set up for TEK, land back, and native stewardship?
Yeah, that's such a great question, and I feel like for me, it's like one of those things where like you got to have tough skin. You got to have that grit where you won't stop until you absolutely cannot do it anymore. So I feel like it's a marathon. It's always going to be something. I don't imagine like there being a time where there isn't something that I have to fight for. So just understanding that earlier rather than later, I think that kind of helps you understand, like, you can't overexert yourself too much at certain areas, because we understand that this system is set up to make it this challenging and to make it even harder, especially on Indigenous folks, but any marginalized communities. So I feel like it starts with that, and then it also takes a level of awareness and education that you have to seek out yourself to be sure you know how to navigate these systems and what buttons to push. And I feel like that's what, like, right now, I do believe that there is a little bit more open-mindedness than there has been in the past. But I think that the difference really is that Indigenous people are starting to evolve in this more Western paradigm. Okay, I need to understand law before I could really say that I'm helping push like this narrative of land back. So we're realizing that we really do got to hit the books to understand the system. Like, you got to identify the problem before you can figure out the solution. And so I do think that that's kind of like a part of the recipe is identifying the issue, solving the problem. But obviously, it's not that cut and dry. It's you got to go. It's like a repeat cycle. It's like a rinse cycle that you're constantly having to go up against. And so I do think that it's more because Native people are stubborn and they won't stop until they get what they feel like they deserve. And so um, I think that we're just evolving a lot quicker and catching up, you know, in the sense of trying to figure out how we could effectively decolonize this society. So I think that that's kind of how I imagine decolonizing, like the recipe for, you know, navigating these political systems.
Thank you. And so Allie, yeah, go ahead.
So, all right. So navigating through this colonial system and decolonizing, shifting the power. I call it the waspy power, and moving that away. And you know, that it really is necessary to explain, because as a Native woman, brown, my experience is that I don't only deal with patriarchy, I deal with capitalism, colonization, and it hits me big in the chest. And maybe everybody on my block doesn't get it, but I get it every day. And so my idea is like, never take advantage of, you know, they take advantage of crisis. We have that capital disaster, capitalizing on a disaster. Well, during climate change and all, you know, basically this economy, the American economy is really fragile, and so is their water systems. Everything is super fragile, and every little economic crisis is an opportunity to seize power. And in my mind, as the housing market crashes and as things happen, as things go on, as the interest rate rises, people need to put more land into trusts and conservation lands, because they need that tax break, because you're paying 5% on your loan this year. Hello. I'm gonna take advantage of that. Everything that was taken advantage of during, you know, colonization, I must flip it. I'm gonna flip the pancake. And so I think that also when it comes to 30 by 30 policies, cities are always trying to figure out, oh, do we charge for parking? You know, 10 cents a bag for your dog poop, anything to make money at a park, you know, you're just using their imagination, you know, disc jockeying, whatever that is, whatever they do out there for the recreation. So I'm like, well, if you get biodiversity and you are in with the federal agreements for 30 by 30, you can generate climate credits and also, you know, a lot of bank for your community. So you got to kind of like solicit that through traditional ecological knowledge. And then I also like see all these organizations hem and haw and cry around about MIPA, CEQA. So I'm gonna make all my TEK, MIPA, and CEQA exempt. Makes it real cute. So I'm trying to just strategize ways. Cleopatra, Genghis Khan, how do I decolonize this and take advantage of the situation that's in front of me, the way it was taken in front of my ancestors? I'm gonna play it back. So I'm gonna calculate, strategize, figure it out. But with the certification process, with co-stewarding, getting into panels, getting into situations that not only put me so much in power, but let me throw my opinion and solicit my opinion. I'm seeming to be able to lean the room. I don't know if I'm leaning the room right now, but I think it's important that we do see the possibilities of decolonizing the work scope on these projects. You know, I think that's really important. I see a work scope and I'm like, no, let me rewrite the work scope. And they're like, really? You know, well, be bossy. Who knows? Who's gonna say this? Tell me no first. So that's kind of my strategy. And I think it's a little radical, I suppose, but it's the same thing that we've been seeing every day. But it's just, I'm saying, colonize the colonizer.
Yes, we've been kind of calling it pirating the system, but and then somebody else suggested it's deprivateering the system. So as if we know the history of privateers and all of that. Um, you know, one of the things I also would like you to talk about, Ali, is well, we both serve on the U.S. Forest Service Region 5 Tribal Relations team, and the Forest Service has just actually come out with a really robust strategic tribal relations plan for California tribes in particular. So, Ali, I'd like you to speak to that process and how, as the National Director of Tribal Relations, Reed Robinson, has stated his objective is to re-indigenize the Forest Service. So can you speak a little bit to that process? Because I think it's interesting.
So we do have, we can put it in the Dropbox. It's a website to the USDA co-stewardship project for Region 5. And so it was an ability, one, for any federal property to have a government to government relationship with the tribes. So it was really important that we were able to set up some 638 or contracting, but we were able also to open that up to non-federally recognized tribes in California as well. So we were able to say federally recognized and non-federally recognized to get co-stewardship projects. We were able to scope the amount of land that you could co-stewardship, and it couldn't be under 10 acres, but it could be over and many more. So it just had to exceed 10 acres. And this gives us co-stewarding. So we were also putting the co-stewarding contracts closer to 10 to 20 years, allowing for a long-term scoping of work to be done on the stewarding, and allowing for traditional practitioners to be appointed by the tribe to help assist for consultation. And this allows for also folks to not have to be employed by the tribe to get to work on these contracts, but to actually be appointed to work with the certain co-stewardship contracting in certain places. This was also to allow for tribes to have political control over some of their sacred lands on federal land, that they could choose those lands to be their co-stewarding areas, and they would be able to petition for those, because that wasn't happening. So there was a lot of obstacles in the way, but one of them we could use for co-stewardship was to allow for tribes to basically say, this place that we come gather at, it's been noticeably public and a camping ground, is now a restoration project, 20 years for the tribe, it's ours. And allows them to have access to that without having, folks just camping around their sites, doing that while they're in ceremony. So this was a change that the feds were allowing to be written into it. So it's brand new. And so you're not going to see everyone like jumping on it, because we worked on it for a long time, and then we were so excited, and when it dropped, we were like, it was so underwhelming. No one even noticed. But I think these are how policies happen. They're really good. And it just takes time, and going to these conferences, dropping those things, and allowing people to know, hey, there's a new contract. When you're in California Region 5 for co-stewardship, and it allows a large room for traditional ecological knowledge and the space for you to choose places that you want to co-steward that are sacred to you as a tribe.
Yes, there's the letter of the law, and then there's acting upon it. Mary, as you said, like proof of concept.
So right there and there is the website for USDA.gov on the actual co-stewarding project, and the steps to go ahead and go, contact the USDA and move forward with your contract and stewardship contracts.
Okay. All right. So we've been doing this work as TEK Chico for what, 4 years now. You've been doing it for 20 years in the community. And as a non-native person of color, like I learn every day, and I'm constantly learning and relearning, trying to understand how to be a good guest, right, on native land, and to have respect and reverence for all of the people and the plants and the animals and the water and everything on the land. And it's really an interesting process, and it's interesting to watch the non-native community members also kind of going through that process of learning. So, this speaks to my next question, which is, how can non-native communities, public agencies, organizations, both community and nonprofit and otherwise, like what's important for them to learn in their process? How can we as non-native show greater respect or help in advancing the work of decolonization and your objectives? So Charlie, let's start with you.
Yeah, I think that this is one of the most frequently asked questions that we get, just because I feel like a lot of non-native folks are like, I really want to support this and I don't know how. So I think that this is a great question. So for me, like I feel like the best thing that non-native folks can do is just be there in a good way, in a genuine way, not in a way that's like very like reactive or like there's going to be feelings that come up for you right off the bat of like some sense of guilt or some sense of responsibility for just the way that indigenous peoples have been treated over time and even more contemporarily. So it's like those feelings like are things that you had to work on yourself. Oftentimes like we have to be the ones to help you through those, and we're here for it. And then there's also like, and we also there's an and to it. There's not like it doesn't stop there. And it's not that we're like non-empathetic people. It's like, yeah, like join the party and like let's get moving, like let's get to it. And so there's that genuinity that I feel like plays like the foundation of it. And so I think in my life, I seen my dad who has like a great working relationship with all these different institutions, whether it's Cal Berkeley, Stanford, University of Oregon, and he would collaborate with like a lot of non-native professors or like just like brilliant minds. And I was like, I don't see this, like I don't believe in this, I don't know how this is helpful. But then you realize that they use their skill set to put out data, to put out these different spreadsheets basically that captures the essence of what we're speaking to, like just from personal experience. So then you're able to create and articulate like a well-balanced argument of like, yeah, no, this is environmental racism because look how much denied access to traditional foods we have. So in that way, that's like a great example of like there's some level of like I can help. And also I think to be something is like you got to know when to step up and when to step back. There's times where we experience like subtle racism, like which I feel like is harder to really pinpoint. And obviously, like in explicit racism instances, allies must be able to help intervene and like because I feel like in instances where I've been put in positions to have to defend myself and like who I was, nobody else is there to help, right? Like when the poop hits the fan, everyone's like, oh, whoa, I can't help. Like, like there's like a level of fight or flight. And people of color, indigenous people, there is no flight, it's always like, you got to fight. Like, this is what I've been taught is like, fight for your rights, like fight for who you are, fight for what you believe in. And so in those instances, I think it's important to support the person experiencing like the subtle racism or voice like what you're doing here is a part of the problem. And really like even if it's just so we can catch a breath, there's times where I'm like, man, I'm about to pass out because I'm like trying to tell them why this is important. And so there's like different things like that. And I don't know, it's hard to always like answer this like adequately and just like, I wish I had like a guide, you know what I mean? Certain scenarios and circumstances there's different wants and needs for each. So I look forward to hearing what other people's takes are. And I really appreciate when folks who are like, I've been here for 20 plus years and I've figured it out, and then they use their experience as a non-native ally to be the ones to help other non-native allies of like, this is how you go about it. You kind of just got to put up with it for a little bit and then you'll get their trust. And like, then you're able to have like, see eye to eye a little bit more. Cause I don't know what it's like to be like an ally role. It's like I've always been like, this is your responsibility to uphold. So it's hard. That's why it's kind of hard for us to be able to answer this question, is because it's just like something you don't really have personal experience with per se, but we definitely have experience with trying to help allies support us. So look forward to everyone else's input.
Ellie?
Well, you know, it is a sticky situation sometimes with traditional ecological knowledge because in certain ways you're giving away secrets or you're sharing knowledge about a place that, you know, and some folks find makes them special. They can capitalize it. You know, it's different in their world experience to hold knowledge. In the Western world, knowledge is power, and it means power over people, power over things, and that is like the patriarchal. That's a very, you know, Western view. And then knowledge in another way could be, you know, humbling and giving you a nurturing, more of a matriarch view of what you're supposed to do, a role in taking care of something. And so this has been difficult to translate to guests that are seeking to come do work and not do harm, but to assist and be an ally and co-conspirator in, you know, Native revolution and coming back and to being having political power over our food, our self, our culture, and our water. And so, you know, the biggest thing that I had to take away is just basically the decolonization of the mind, and gatekeeping, you know, natives has been some of the hardest things that I've seen, where natives that don't understand grassroots revolutionary stuff and begin to be involved in their community often come up with non-native allies that are no more than them, and that can have power over them for that. And so I guess my best, and that bothers me so much that I have to discuss it now and be like, recognize that patriarchy, recognize when knowledge is giving you power, and whether or not are you feeding your matriarchy, where knowledge is giving you a sense of responsibility to nurture and help. And those are kind of what's on the table. And so I just want to keep it black and white right now. Which way, what dog you want to feed, and keep it at that level right now. So thank you.
Yeah. I know many people will see the initials TEK and say TEK, which also kind of bothers me, because when the thing is just as like tech, like technical knowledge, it's like, oh, I learned a new trick, now I'm like this. But one of the things we've begun to incorporate into our trainings is ethics, and really, you know, if you're gonna learn this knowledge, you have to understand it comes with a set of ethics, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, the ethics are entitlements, you know, and you know, I try to really explain to most folks, I was like, if you're an American citizen on American soil right now, by law, I have more entitlements as a native than you. Yeah, I do. And so that is just kind of explaining that there is a political difference between different folks, but it's not based on race, it's based on political affiliation. And so I'm politically affiliated with the sovereign tribe. That's you know, and so that's what gives me that entitlement. It's my affiliation with that governance. That I'm a citizen of that tribe. I'm a citizen to that nation. And so it takes the race out of it. It's not a race, it's a nation, you know. And so that allows me to kind of have some agency and kind of, you know, navigate.
yeah, Mary.
Traditional ecological knowledge is what TEK stands for.
Yes.
To build off of some of the things I heard you, Charlie, and Allie say, you know, be there in a good way, and working, you know, as through the sense of guilt and responsibility. Starting at home, you know, like at home in the workplace is where I've really seen the, you know, developing the space, you know, that we call our DEIJ work, diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice. And by creating a space that operates differently from your day-to-day, like I have a contract to, undertake this restoration project, has allowed us to practice working in relation with each other. So just creating that space within the workplace to normalize this way of working. I mean, it feels a little astounding to be saying that right now, because I'm getting used to that fundamental shift in having to take a piece of me and leave it at home and then show up to work to get work done. And I feel like because we've created a space where we're able to bring our whole selves to the table, we are getting more into that ethic, like living our values within our work. So as a step, like for a non-native organization to advance, I think that's a great one. And secondly, to go back to the rubric that we developed, it's simply a way of like having a transparent and upfront communication. We're going to start a project. So we ask ourselves four sets of questions. How did the project come to our attention? Like, who brought it to us? Are we partnered with Native American tribes in this project? Who is the outreach and communications intended for, and who are we reaching? And which vendors are we choosing? So by deliberately going through that questioning, we're at least bringing those questions out into to talk at a deeper level about them.
Thank you. And last question before we go to audience Q&A, just the last go around. What do you see, or what would you like to see as the future of California watersheds? And Charlie?
Cool. I'm glad I got the first response, because I feel like this is a great question. I feel like I would like to see the future of California watersheds being managed by Indigenous people. I think that's like a low-hanging fruit response, but I think that when you see projects like the Prairie Creek, it's been planned for by the Yar tribe, it's been implemented by the Yar tribe, and I assume it's going to be monitored by the Yar tribe. So I think that that is a great project that you could see what co-management, like healthy co-management practices could look like. I would like to see a lot more good fire on the land. I think that that is a staple of any healthy ecosystem, especially up here in Northern California. So I'd like to see more fire. Obviously, the dams coming out on the Klamath River, I think that's like ideal for me. I think that having that flow freely is the best thing that we could do for ourselves and for the land, and obviously for the more than human relatives that we depend on and depend on us. So that's kind of what I'd like to see in the future. And I also wanted to see it like in the present time too. I'm not sure if we want to get into like semantics of like how far in the future, but like this should have happened like 10 years ago, 20 years ago. So this is just some things that like basic expectations that I feel like are very reasonable and feasible. So like it seems like it's like a indigenous, like futuristic, like dream, but I think that we're really close to literally breaking down that barrier to get to a place where we are living and breathing our culture in the way we're supposed to. But I think the next thing that we need to think about is, the upslope management, regaining our right and responsibility to burn and to take care of, Mother Earth the way that we know how. So that's kind of how I imagine it. And I'd also like to say that like an ideal world for me is where I don't have to spend so much time talking about what we need to be doing, and I'd rather be doing it. I'd rather be burning. I'd rather be fishing and hunting and harvesting right now. But I think that hopefully sooner rather than later we could spend more time doing what we want to be doing rather than talking about it. So that's just a little drop at the end.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Charlie. Mary.
That was beautiful and hard to follow, Charlie. I guess I'll just draw a little inspiration from a recent relationship developed with Cal Poly Humboldt. A professor there, Bubba, and has inspired me. I mean, we're starting to work a little more deeply together at one of the project sites to, so I think a vision for the future of California watersheds is where our education is deeply embedded in the landscape. He strives to have outdoor classrooms, and my son is at a local school that is centered around outdoor classrooms, outdoor education. And I would love to see our education systems deeply embedded in the landscape.
Yay, thank you. And Allie.
Honestly, I really feel like there needs to be, we need to get our 200-year flood. I think a lot of the California infrastructure needs to be blown out. I think we need to have a lot more like, just complete collapses and destruction of dams one way or another. They began about, we didn't have dams 100 years ago. So this is a brand new technology to humans. And this is Hotel California, as far as I'm concerned, just like the Eagle said. And we're going to take it down. So it's going to be a tough place to live. It's used to disaster. When we study native plants, when we study restoration, it's crazy because I work with plants like mule fat and just tons of them that you can't just do them in a nursery at a and propagate them and create them in a nursery in this very pampering situation. These native plants are there to do a job after destruction. They're there to hit. They're there after a volcano. They're there after a big flood. They're there for a destruction. They're that and a big fire. They know that's going to come. So that's what they're built for. They're like MMA fighters, these native plants. And so you can't beat them up, man. They're good. We're the ones that are vulnerable. And so, and that's how I see the water system is that we need to have some major disasters, earthquakes and floods that just take out the infrastructure and then allow us to rebuild it and do it sensibly. And that's what I see for the future.
Thank you. All right. So now we can go to some audience questions, and I can also jump in and help answer some of this stuff too. So who is reading it off? Okay, here we go. Right. Oops. Oh, there's a lot of stuff going on. Hold on a second. All right. So number one is do you so wait, let me scroll up. I'll scroll down and then go up and then I'll come back down if there are any questions. So the first one is, do you feel that organizations are doing enough? Anyone can jump in.
Like public, like nonprofit paid with, or are you talking public utilities paid with taxpayers, like agencies, municipals? Because they're separate things. So when you're looking at the Reagan coming in the 90s and all these nonprofits being made, it's because they wanted to use public money to do public things. And then anybody that wanted to invest on some really cool stuff like restoration, conservation, they could put it with their taxpayer dollars and get a big tax write-off. And so the wealthy can choose where to pay their taxes, and the poor, we don't get to choose. We get to pay for these agencies and municipals. So one, does wealthy organization and nonprofits made by billionaires donations do a lot for the community? And that absolutely no, they're paid by millionaires. They're not going to do what they're going to do what millionaires want them to do because they pay for them. And then you're going to say taxpayer agencies? No, they don't do enough. There's not enough money for them to do anything. As they barely get enough to take care of parks. 50% of the budgets that go to police. And most all the cities, Chico, So, I mean, Chico, and then in Chico and in other nations
yeah.
and other cities. So municipal. So most of all our taxpayers go to cops and firefighters. So are you going to get money into restoration? You're going to have to bank on nonprofits, and then they have to be bank on millionaire contributions. So that's the answer to that.
Some quick statistics for you all. So Cal Fire, has received something on the order of $37 billion for wildfire mitigation. I think only like less than 1 billion is earmarked for tribes. Also, in terms of philanthropic giving, because I know lots of folks in nonprofits and foundations in this room, only 1% goes to Indigenous people nationally, and less than 0.1% goes to California tribes, even though California tribes are 20% of the federally recognized tribal governments in the United States. So there's some interesting statistics. Mary or Charlie, want to speak to this question?
I just really want to echo Allie's response, because I think that that's the best way you could answer that question. So no, I don't have anything else to say.
Okay. Mary.
I guess one way to look at it would be, we have a job because the capitalist system is extractive, and, so working ourselves out of a job is, maybe that's enough. That's my personal, that's my personal perspective.
Okay, thank you. Oh yeah, so Lisa had a little bit more context for her question. I think that's been addressed, I hope so, that the policy landscape in the US is very different from where so the approaches and assumptions in land back and embracing TEK feels like not enough. Like I said, there's money constraints, and there's also distribution constraints as well. Okay, so let's go. Okay, so here's a question from earlier that said, why is it important for organizations and conservationists to know what the habitat restoration should be? That knowledge is contained within TEK. How do we shift the mindset and shift power? I'm going to try to jump in real quick as somebody who's actually, a lot of my academic work was on critiquing conservation. I think there were some comments in the chat about that. A lot of times, conservation is putting a fence around it and leaving it alone, assuming that nature has done its job. A lot of John Muir quotes, not understanding that John Muir was looking at a landscape 20 years after the genocide of the people that he had, of the landscapes he was looking at, these kinds of things. So I think number one is to just understand that, in most Indigenous languages, there is no word for wild or wilderness, right? And every inch of land on this continent, on Turtle Island, is stewarded by Native people. So that's at least my quick answer, but I'll let y'all kind of jump in on that too.
And I think it's a great question, because we're talking about land back. And it's like, is it going back to the way it was pre-colonial contact? Absolutely, in certain ways, because pre-colonial contact land actually has an abundance of wealth to an Indigenous person. And so that that is the shift in wealth. So a lot of times, like I was talking when I first came in, like, what's our currency? My currency in trade: baskets, knowledge of plants, knowledge of medicine, where to fish, where to eat, where the protein is, where you can get calories all day, every day, without paying a dime for that. I know where that is here. That is an economy. That is currency. That knowledge is currency. That's real value. And that's what I've been knowing and teaching for 20 years, is the value of that knowledge, and how valuable, the closer and closer and closer we get to climate change, the more it really, you think it's cool to know a Native person that knows a lot about what should be there, what the plants are, how to process them, for a lone, naked and afraid TV show. Imagine it for a real crisis, a real life crisis out here in life. And so if we are looking at a 200-year flood, as California is going to get hit, and we are looking at thousands, if not hundreds and hundreds, if not millions of people dying in California with the next series of big hits that event here, this type of knowledge is so valuable, and it is currency, that I think that we should know what land back, bringing it back to where it was, is that you would be able to eat, get medicine, and live within 30 miles of yourself for a long time. And you don't have to travel, and you don't have to import a bunch of stuff. So it's about knowing, putting your fever medicines close to you, putting certain kind of proteins and foods around you that bloom all year round. It's not just about knowing that your broccoli and all your winter fruit in your garden are going to grow. What about all your winter food that's out there, what we call wilderness? And so to me, that's what the knowledge of land back is like, getting back to understanding the true economy of where you're at. Because we're going to inch toward that every day of our lives, and we're going to let go of what we see today every day too.
Thank you. Charlie or Mary?
Yeah, I could just add on. I think that like for me, that answer was like, that's how you shift power, is like just reimagining what health or wealth is. You know, it's not like how many dollars you have in your bank account. It's how much knowledge you have to feed your family, like from traditional food standpoint at each time of the year, while also juggling the influences of climate change. Like we're constantly having to be like, oh nope, it's still too cold. Like we still gotta wait for the eels to come back, you know? Like as much as like I'm like, dang, I'm already usually have like my quota done by now. It's like you're constantly having to be attuned. So that's how you shift the power. But I think it's important for organizations or conservationists to have an idea of what the habitat might have looked like. And that's for just like sustainability purposes. Like you don't want to just like if you don't know what used to be, like what are you trying to restore it to? So I think that just like the ecological services that will come from any type of restoration work, like you got to have something you got to have a goal, and that goal has to be suitable for the environment. Like it can't just be like an arbitrary goal that you come up with on your own. Like you have to have some framework, some foundation that you're trying to achieve. And so I think that's why it's important. And I feel like that also connects Indigenous people to being a part of that project, because sometimes it's like, man, I've only been here for 50 years. Like, I don't know what that, like, besides that time mark, I don't know what it looked like before then. And so maybe that's like an opening for folks to reach out, some groups to reach out to those tribes who are like, what did this look like? And how can we attempt to try and make that what it is, what it could be? And sometimes it's like irreparable. You know, there's plenty of creeks that have just been blown out through dynamite. It's like you can't just put up a wall. Like you can't just pull all the sediment and rocks right back up and have it go into like a meandering prairie. Like there's some things you just can't do. And so I think that's why it's important to still, try and restore some habitats. But I think it's just an opportunity to reach out Indigenous people and let them, not just contribute, but lead and co-manage that project, like the Yurok tribe has been doing at Prairie Creek. So I think that also kind of answers the how do we shift. It's just it can be as simple as that. It can be simple as just like having healthy relationships, respectful relationships with tribal communities, to be sure that they're a part of that strategy, so that way you're getting to a more sustainable and like sociable place.
Thank you. Mary? Something to add?
Brilliant words that I'm just going to listen. I don't have anything to add. Thank you.
Okay, no problem. All right, so next question. So this one is really great. How can we educate, influence, and I think we're already doing this, non-native people, the general public, and power structures to understand that Indigenous people had land and water management practices that created abundance rather than mining fertility and resources of food, medicine, and shelter? This is new info for lots of people. Absolutely. One of the reasons I went to the Amazon for my dissertation research was because I realized that so much of this discourse, all the laws, all the regulations, even all the scientific literature had this background assumption. It was never really stated, but it was an assumption that human presence in an environment inherently degraded the environment. I don't know if y'all had heard of the idea of tragedy of the commons, right? Is this idea that like humans were somehow some kind of, not part of the earth, but some kind of virus that like if we just showed up, oh no, the environment's going to collapse. Right. And so like part of, why I ended up doing the work that I did was because I was like, but wait, there are practices that actually improve, where human presence actually improves the environment, right? But so much of so much of the laws, the regulations, the policies have that implicit assumption that there's no way that that humans on a landscape could actually make it better. So how do we make that shift? Because it is a new info and a new paradigm. It's something that's been really ingrained in our minds by colonization. So part of decolonizing is actually being able to imagine something different. So, y'all,
Well,
anyone?
for me, it's just like, you got to show. Now it's to the point of, I've done the example and I've shown it. I took a riparian restoration with community outreach engagement at Verbena Fields in Chico, California. You can look at tekchico.org. You can also look in, there's pictures of just a reconfiguration of a seasonal creek, taking the biomass and creating our own beaver dams and waiting for we would just create them and wait for the rain and the flood to come so that we could slow, spread, and sink the water, just like the beavers do. And we were able to cut down all the willow and all the mule fat and propagate them and organize them in a way to slow, sink, and spread all the water, and mimicking beavers. And so going and look at the beaver dams, what beavers doing, and then go and seeing like, well, we don't have beavers, it's seasonal creek, we have to be the beavers. And so we demonstrate that and show that. And then we have a riparian that's got all this biodiversity. We keep seed banking this living seed bank, this living nursery. And we're created this. And now it's 30 by 30. Now we have this biodiversity. It qualifies for 30 by 30. We could actually, the community can cash in. This is where the money comes in. And this is where the community can actually like benefit from having a restored, carbon sequestering rich place like this riparian that does that. So me, it's like leading by example by doing a project and then measuring the outcomes of that project. And then the best thing to do is then to get a bunch of people to look at the money behind it, which is kind of silly, but it's their game. So whatever. But you can actually look at that benefit. And so here's some restoration, just a picture.
Just share the screen real quick so you can
Before and after.
see a before and after picture. So
of sinking and spreading. We had a small, thinner creek canal. We made all these beaver dams. The water came down and just sink and spread it like that. So we slowed it down, we sunk it, and we spread it. We created a very large riparian area where we're growing all this willow. And right now it's all straight shoots coming straight out of the creek. And so if anyone knows basket weaving, basket weavers, they know that a basket weaver like tends to the place because it's just perfect long straight shoots everywhere. And it's taken me like years to get it like that. And I really want to burn in there and getting controlled cultural burns in there. So, but it's taken me 12 years of this work out here with the community to prove that I can do it and we could do it and it's okay. And then now if we measure those outcomes and then get some financial benefits, that's the only way I feel like we could really convince and educate the community. Is just by showing them and then showing them the money.
Takes an ecosystem to make a basket. Right on. Charlie or Mary? Well, cool. All right.
I could add in,
sure.
Just a quick, so bringing storytelling and art and, centering the work that's being done for health, like talking about health in different ways, right? Our health is inextricably connected to the landscape. And so finding opportunities to, even in your own language, how are you talking about health, or is it health care, so shifting your own language and looking for ways to tell stories and elevate the great work that is already happening is what I would add.
Thank you.
I see a question in here. I know there's a few over there. I'll just mention Butte Creek Ecological Reserve I am the TK practitioner for the Mechoopda tribe, but currently right now, Hilo Ramirez, who is the EPA director, the president of the Cultural Resource Enterprise, as well as the tribal chair, or the tribal treasurer of the tribal council, is in full control of that. So that's that political story. And now we have the next question. Ali mentioned gathering lands are low-hanging fruit for Indigenous contracts. I want to say if I was saying the low-hanging fruit.
It says what study structures?
What study structure in place for the non-Indigenous to align with and enhance these rather than co-opt or take over? So that's a great question. So it is the dilemma of the white savior. Well, how do I do this? So it's really important that, you know, when we're working with Indigenous communities, just to take direction of where those roles are and asking directly, what can I do for you today? What can I do for you on this project? And I think that those will kind of help alleviate some of those, just like, you know, like an alcoholic lives one day at a time. We live with natives and non-natives one day at a time. So it's really important that we just live in this moment of like direct questions. What can I do for you, Ali? What can I do for you, this person, this person? Because collectively, if you treat all natives the same, you'll end up, it'll just go bad really quick. So we're all individuals. So it's really important to find, and then folks like myself that actually have access. Like I have a website, tekchico.org. We meet every Friday. We teach everybody. And people, if you have a question, I'm always like, can I go teach somebody how to strip willow and make willow bark stuff? I'm like, yeah, that's simple. I wouldn't say that you were seizing the moment of taking our cultural identity by taking the willow bark off the willow. That's fine. There's other things that can be testing, where we have folks that are gathering at my preserves all the native seeds and then making on seed bank and selling them at a store with native plants, when they actually just took a restoration site that I had with a bunch of biodiversity and just took the seeds and then created a profit from it. So those are some examples of where it's like, oh, that's not quite right. And then something that is, you know, I don't mind if you know, you learn from me how to cut willow and you're like, I hope I can do this at other willows, other places. I'm like, oh, yeah, that's what I'm teaching you for, so that all the willows can get the love. Not that you have to like ask permission to do something the way it was taught, I guess is what I'm saying. What is
So
can't read.
this is a great question here too. Do you think that there is a role in decolonizing economics and healing the environment to work towards constitutional level rights for ecosystems that protect public health and rights to equal democracy, that insist on all persons having an equal say over governmental public policy? Let's say Charlie or Mary, do you want to start with any of these?
That is a Mary or Ali question. That is not me.
Well, I think what my answer a little bit of that is that, I mean, I've had to look at the fact that when I was working, it was really important that traditional ecological knowledge, or ITEK, or the application of a traditional practitioner procuring things from the forest, lands, woodlands, riparian, is that it's under USDA. And the original agriculture for us is the tobacco, the nicotina, right? Tobacco plants, and all of our California tribes are all man planted, woman planted, or human planted. They're planted by humans. Birds don't eat the seeds and then poop them everywhere, and then they just accidentally grow everywhere. Every single tobacco plant, nicotine, has been planted by a human. And so that is the first ag of TEK practicing, is that agriculture of tobacco. And so when we get into going into kind of culturally assess an area through the plants, I can tell you there's a village around here, because I can look at the tobacco plants and say, this is intentional crop. This is intentional agriculture. And so if we decolonize agriculture through TEK, traditional ecological knowledge, and we learn that we can't just build a huge nursery with a bunch of drip lines and a bunch of irrigation and blah, 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 and then create California plants that like it rough, like clay soil, like it different, need to have a getting bit on by 8 different plants, insects before it gets to be a year old, before it can meet. Like it has all kinds of spooky spells that it has to go through to grow. And so you can't do that in a nursery. And so those are why living seed banks and living places, that these places, seed banks exist in these living places that you can procure off of or propagate out or split out and create other restoration. To me, that's reimagining the economics of putting those preserves and conservation lands into a job of restoring other places, even through Cali OS after a big hit, or after we have our 200-year flood and everything has changed and we have to do restoration. It'd be great to have, and I believe that if we do a great restoration area with native plants, it could be completely flooded and taken by a hit with an earthquake and a volcano and a bunch of couple things and probably still be fine. And so that's why more of these resilient places are necessary, not just in Northern California, Central California, Southern California, but throughout the coast and up and down our areas, because it's just, that's the economics of the future.
Absolutely. I'm going to also share something because, you know, it really is about like, yeah, the economics that comes from the ecosystem rather than, as Mary said, through the funding and the contracts and all this. Yes, just yesterday, you know, we were looking for some seeds and, you know, we went out to a place that was a restoration site maintained by River Partners, which is, you know, one of the biggest restoration organizations in our area. And, you know, we go in there and it's sort of planted rows of willows and all this stuff. And they were spraying herbicides in the restoration area where there were nettles, there were bulbs, there were, you know, lots of food and medicine that were native plants. But because they didn't see it as food and medicine or things that humans actually want and need and are, you know, they just saw them as like, oh no, this is overgrowth, we're just going to spray it all. And it was like, oh my God, you know, this is how because, you know, and then they draw down millions and millions of dollars in contracts, right? And because it takes millions and millions of dollars to like have somebody go out there in a hazmat suit and spray all of these foods and medicines, you know, it's just, it's an interesting contrast, I guess. So just to, you know, highlight that difference between conventional restoration that sees economics as maximizing your contract versus what Ali is explaining with TEK. And I think you also just answered the previous question, which was about decolonizing agriculture. So, all right, Charlie or Mary, you have anything else to say? Okay, well, we are just about at 6:30. So thank you so much. Is there any, I'll just do another go around for last thoughts and comments. You know, what do we want our audience here to kind of go home with at the end of the day?
Well, I just want to let you all know that you have met a revolutionary. So nice to meet you. But no, I really want folks to just walk away with some things to think about. I really want folks to look up 30 by 30, get educated on 30 by 30 so that they could use that as a tool and a mechanism to help with their community to generate some funding for restoration using traditional ecological knowledge, and also using traditional ecological knowledge with Indigenous folks as a scientific method of restoration, and saying this is a methodology. So that's really what I want the take home to be.
Great. And I just posted the link to California 30 by 30 in the chat. Charlie.
Yeah, I just want folks to take away that, like, you know, keep putting yourself in these positions and these like areas of like development and growth. I think that this is a starting point. So, you know, constantly being in that, like, just being hungry for this perspective, I think will go a long ways. And then just, you know, always like have TEK or Indigenous people's perspective in your mind when you are navigating different restorational like type work, conservation work, because you'd be surprised how little, like, as much as we're talking about these great projects that we're doing, there's still so many spaces that like don't even think twice about including tribal peoples in their conversations. So you'd be surprised, you might be in a lot of different areas where it's like that's not really at the forefront of the conversation. So that's what it means to be an ally as well, is like bringing it up in spaces that you're not having to follow someone's lead like ours. Like, yes, it's great when you have spaces where you can build off that like momentum, but there's times where there's nobody in the room who's going to voice that like perspective. And so remembering that you have a little bit of awareness and knowledge from this space at the very least to be able to, be like, hey, what about this? Like, even if it's just one question that you pose, at least you're planting a seed, so that's kind of what I hope people take away.
Thank you. Mary.
It's been such a pleasure to be here and listen and try to share from my perspective and sort of build off of what you said, Charlie. Yeah, create the space. So in that, I'm thinking about tempo. It all feels like everything is so incredibly urgent. And I wish I could come up with the exact quote, but I've heard David Cobb say it a few times, like, oh my gosh, everything's happening so fast around us, and it's all so incredibly important to act right now. What's the first thing we have to do? Go really slow. And what David put in the chat, Mel's quote, follow the Indigenous if you want to survive while things are collapsing. Following Indigenous people sitting and talking and listening, and then just doing your best to be in a reciprocal relationship, respectful, reciprocal, and listen. Yeah, listen more.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, thank you all so much for our conversation, and thank our panelists so much for this wonderful insights. I'm just gonna say, I know somebody reposted the websites in the chat, but I'm just gonna, it's real easy because like each one of our organizations is like the .org. so California Open Lands is californiaopenlands.org or tekchico.org. So both of those websites, you can see what Ali and I and the community here is doing. For Save California Salmon, that's Charlie's organization, is californiasalmon.org. And for Mary's organization, California Trout, it's caltrout.org. So, and then, yes, so thank you all so much. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I hope everybody had a good time listening.
Yes.
Great to be here with you.
Thank you. Let's change the paradigm.